Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening today. My name is Tyler Stump, and I'm an archivist at the Pennsylvania State Archives. Today I'm going to be talking about some basics of records management for municipal government in Pennsylvania. Records can be overwhelming if we don't keep on top of them, but with the help of the Commonwealth's record retention manuals and a few other tools and tips, managing your records can be cost-effective, efficient, and decrease your office's liabilities so you can focus on the important work that you're there to do. By the end of this webinar, you should have a good sense of what Commonwealth record management laws apply to you, know what the Municipal Records Manual is, and how to use that to determine the best retention time and disposal procedures for your records. As we start, let's take a moment and think about how your office manages its records. And what does records management actually mean for us? The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania defines records management as planning, controlling, directing, organizing, training, promoting, and other managerial activities involved with respect to records creation, records maintenance and use, and records disposition in order to achieve adequate and proper documentation of the policies and transactions of the Commonwealth for an effective and economical management of agency operations. That's a pretty good definition, but I think it's a little wordy. I like to say that in government, records management boils down to three core things. 1. Ensuring information is available from creation to disposal to allow our government to function. And notice I used the word information here instead of just documents or records. 2. Protecting the interests of government and its constituents. And 3. Doing all of this at the lowest possible cost. If we manage our records efficiently, then we should expect to see a reduction in business costs, which would come from storage costs, staff time dealing with records, avoided lawsuits, and many other things. Does anyone have a storeroom that looks like this? I certainly hope not. This is a pretty good example of bad records management practices. There's a ton of material here, and how could you ever find one particular record that you would need? How would you know exactly what you have, or if you have anything that you shouldn't be keeping for any longer? Think about the risks that come with storing records like this. Oversaving records, storing records indefinitely, or even just longer than needed. A lot of these things make it very difficult to locate anything, and that could be a big problem in any records storage area. And this kind of problem doesn't just happen overnight. In the case of this photograph here, someone probably put one or two boxes of records out of the way in storage, and then somebody else did the same with a few more boxes, and another, and over the years and decades, you have a massive pile of records like this, which is totally unmanageable. Even in the case of this example here, you'd still have to produce any records that could be requested through a lawsuit or a right-to-know request. It doesn't matter if the records are hard to find, it's still your responsibility if you have custody of the records. Going through this many records can quickly become very costly to you and your staff and hurt your office's bottom line. Having too many records that you shouldn't be holding on to impede your record's readiness and makes it harder to protect essential records that you might have if there's ever an emergency or some other disaster situation. It also makes it hard to use your storage space efficiently. Records management means that we only keep records for as long as we need them, and then we get rid of them as quickly as we can. I'm going to repeat that again just because I think it's very, very important. We want to keep records for only as long as they are needed, and then we want to dispose of them. Keep in mind that keeping records that are not in active use and are past their designated retention times is going to make you much more vulnerable to lawsuits and other types of vulnerabilities. If you dispose of a record in accordance with the Commonwealth's record schedules, you can't be held liable if it's ever requested later. But on the flip side of that, if somebody requests a record that you have but could have gotten rid of, you are still mandated to produce that record. Keep this in mind when you have staff who are trying to hoard records and shouldn't be, because that can happen sometimes. This can become a really important issue, especially in offices that frequently receive right-to-know requests or are frequently involved in litigation. Okay, before we get any further into records management and the Municipal Records Manual, let's make sure we're on the same page on what a record actually is. Think about that for a second. What is a record? How would we define what a record is? The Municipal Records Act of 1968 in Pennsylvania defines a record as, quote, any papers, dockets, books, maps, photographs, or other documentary materials regardless of physical form or characteristic, made or received by an entity under law or in connection with the exercise of its powers and the discharge of its duties. The Opens Records Act uses a really similar definition and says that a record is any information that is, quote, created, received, or retained pursuant to law or in connection with a transaction, business, or activity of an agency. So when we talk about records, we're talking about information. It doesn't matter if it's paper or electronic or anything else. It's the information content that counts. As long as it is evidence of your business and activities, you should be considering it a record. We should keep in mind that this definition of a record extends to documents created by vendors and contractors if it's related to business that we're doing with them as well. Now that we know what is considered a record, let's consider what sort of material would not be considered records. Remember, it's the information and not the content or the form that we're concerned about. Published material used for reference, duplicate copies of documents, sometimes drafts and work copies of records, notes, blank forms. These things often do not contain original official information from your office. In these cases, the Municipal Records Manual considers these items non-records or reference copies and says that you just need to keep them for as long as they have administrative value, and then you can dispose of them. No need for any disposal procedures since they're not formal or official records. Likewise, if you are not the official office of record for a particular document, you are not responsible for its retention, so you can dispose of them in the same fashion. An example of this would be if you work in a borough office and have a copy of a published law or a manual from a state agency. These are not your records, and you can treat them the same as a dictionary or any other published work. It's another office's responsibility to manage these records. Okay, now we know which documents in our office are official records that we're responsible for and which are not. But how do we know how long to keep our records? What to do when we no longer need to keep records? Fortunately, there's records retention schedules and manuals that help take the guesswork out of all of this. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania issues records manuals for municipal, county, and state offices. The Municipal Records Manual is written by the local government records committee and staff from the Pennsylvania State Archives. Its origins trace back to the Municipal Records Act of 1968, and that's where its authority comes from. It was last updated in 2019. The manual is available on the State Archives website, and I'd recommend that you make sure you've got the most recent version if you already have a copy. It was most recently updated in 2019, like I just said a minute ago. This manual has information on how long to keep records and what to do with them when they should be disposed. It authorizes you to keep official records in electronic format, and it releases you and your staff from responsibility of these records as long as you're disposing of them appropriately. Here's the front cover of the Municipal Records Manual. This might look familiar to some of you, but definitely make sure that you have the copy that lists the most recent version of it at the bottom. So right here it says March 2019. The Municipal Records Act requires that a municipality officially go on record with a resolution stating its intent to follow this manual before it can actually use it. If you look in the back of the Municipal Records Manual in Appendix B, there's a sample resolution where you can just fill in the blanks with your particular information and have your governing body pass it. Thinking about liability again, this is very useful for your municipality legally and can be helpful if somebody requests a document through right to know or through litigation that you had already disposed of because it was past its retention period. Once this resolution is on record that you are following the Municipal Records Manual, you are then protected by it and everything else that the Municipal Records Act includes. Most pages in the manual looked like this, a long list of different types of records and instructions on how to manage them. Types of records are organized by the usual office of origin, like police department or water authority. Each record has an identifying record number, an official title, a description, because sometimes some offices will have different names for the same record, and a retention period, which either is a specific length of time or is just listed as permanent. So this is pretty straightforward, and these record schedules should list probably 90 to 95% of all the records that you're creating in your office. If you have a record that you can't find in the records manual or in any of these schedules, you can always call the state archives and we can help you out. It's important to keep records secure and accessible to appropriate staff or members of the public if that's appropriate. There are additional rules for permanent records kept in electronic form, which are discussed in a section of this manual called the Policy Regarding the Form of Permanent Recordation for Municipalities. If a record has non-permanent retention, which means that it has a finite number of years it's to be kept, then those records can be destroyed when they have met the end of that retention period. The Records Manual states that you should have your municipality pass a resolution every time you are destroying records, listing the name, date range, and quantity of records that are going to be destroyed. There's an example resolution in the Municipal Records Manual in Appendix C at the end. The manual also has special instructions for the disposal of records that have permanent retention. This would mean if you had permanent paper records and wanted to make copies, electronic copies, and get rid of the paper. There is one form if you want to keep a microfilm copy of a permanent record, where you would also submit a microfilm inspection report, and there's also a different form if you're scanning that record and keeping a digitized copy. This is covered in the policy section that I mentioned a moment ago. Either way, the important thing is, if a record is permanent and you want to get rid of the paper copies, there is an additional step that you need to be following in the disposal process. As long as you are following all the instructions listed in the Municipal Records Manual, you and your staff cannot be held liable to produce records that you disposed of appropriately. Alright, like I said about non-permanent records, your municipality must pass a resolution each time you're disposing records after their retention has been met. This is done each time you're getting rid of records, but you can use one resolution to cover many different records if you're getting rid of many all at the same time. So if it's the end of the year and you're working in your borough fire department, you might have things like daily activity records, drill reports, and permits that have all passed their retention. You can list all of them on one resolution together instead of doing separate resolutions for each. You just have to remember to list the record titles, date ranges, and volume of each. As I mentioned before, there is a sample resolution in Appendix C of the Municipal Records Manual, and here's a copy of that page just to see where you really just need to fill in a few blanks and put in the pertinent information before your governing body passes it. The Municipal Records Act of 1968 and the Right to Know law are both quite clear that if you're following these schedules and this Municipal Records Manual, then you cannot be held responsible for records that you've disposed of appropriately. Likewise, the Right to Know law explicitly states that the law does not trump the records retention policies that are in this manual. That means that if you follow the retention stated in this manual first, Right to Know concerns come second. So, to summarize what we've talked about today, we've gone over what records management is and what managing our records is all about, keeping for things just for as long as we need to and then disposing of them. We talked about what defines a record and how it's the information that's important and not necessarily what format the record comes in. We looked at the Municipal Records Manual, how to find a record's assigned retention time, and how to dispose of permanent and non-permanent records. And we also talked about the non-liability of your staff when they're following the Records Manual. The Pennsylvania State Archives has many additional resources and staff available to answer any questions you might have about this manual and any other records management requirements for municipalities in Pennsylvania. You can visit the Pennsylvania State Archives website, and we have a records management page with lots of other resources, as well as contact us at any time. We'd be more than happy to help you with any other questions that you might have. Good luck with your records. Thank you.